Across the galaxy, there exists a universal truth that every advanced civilization learns. War is precise, calculated, and follows established protocols. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 worlds using their methodical approach to conflict. Surgical strikes, minimal casualties, efficient occupation. Their military doctrine was studied in academies across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. But nothing could have prepared Commander Vexhala for what she witnessed when humanity entered the galactic stage. When the first human ships appeared at the edge of Terran space, the Galactic Council dismissed them as another primitive species that would either submit quickly or be easily conquered. The humans had crude weapons, outdated shields, and ships that looked like they were held together with determination and spare parts. What the galaxy didn't understand was that humans didn't just fight wars, they became them. The recordings from the Battle of Kepler 442b broke every known principle of civilized warfare. Where other species saw chaos and brutality, humans saw victory through impossible odds. Where others saw reckless abandon, humans saw calculated madness that somehow worked. Commander Vexhala watched those battle recordings 17 times before she submitted her resignation and booked passage to Earth. She had to understand how a species could turn their greatest weaknesses into terrifying strengths, how they could make the galaxy's most advanced military doctrines look like children's games. This is the story of what she found when she arrived on the world that redefined what it meant to fight, to survive, and to never ever give up. The command center of the Zephyrian flagship, Eternal Dominion, hummed with the quiet efficiency that had made their empire the galaxy's foremost military power. Commander Vexhala stood before the massive holographic display, her forearms folded behind her back in the traditional posture of contemplation. Her scaled skin had shifted to a deep blue, indicating deep thought among her species, while her secondary eyes tracked the tactical readouts scrolling across her peripheral vision enhancers. Commander, we have received the full battle recordings from the Kepler 442b engagement, announced Lieutenant Kethmore, his own scales flickering with uncertainty. The Galactic Council has classified them as priority viewing for all senior staff. Vexhala's primary eyes remained fixed on the central display as it began to show the pre-battle analysis. Kepler 442b was a standard resource world, rich in the rare metals needed for hyperspace drives. The indigenous population had been evacuated, and the planet was to be divided among the 3 major galactic powers according to established protocol. Simple, clean, efficient. Then the humans had arrived. The first thing that struck Vexhala was how wrong their intelligence had been. Human ships weren't just crude, they were actively harmful to look at from an aesthetic standpoint. Their vessels appeared to have been designed by someone who had heard about the concept of aerodynamics secondhand and decided to ignore it entirely. Weapons were bolted onto surfaces that shouldn't be able to support them. Armor plating was clearly welded over existing damage, and their formation flying looked more like organized chaos than military precision. "Begin playback," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority that had guided the Zephyrian fleet through countless victories. The first human ship to engage the hegemony forces was a destroyer-class vessel that the humans had designated Murphy's Law. Its approach vector made no tactical sense, coming in at an angle that exposed its weakest armor to enemy fire while simultaneously making it impossible to bring its main weapons to bear effectively. "Pause recording," Vexhala said, her scales shifting to a confused orange. "Lieutenant, confirm the tactical analysis of this approach vector." "Confirmed, Commander. According to all established doctrine, this is a textbook example of how not to engage a superior force. They're exposing themselves to concentrated fire from at least 6 different positions while limiting their own offensive capabilities to roughly 30% of optimal." Continue playback. What happened next would haunt military academies for generations. As the hegemony ships moved to exploit the humans' tactical error, the Murphy's Law suddenly accelerated far beyond what its engine specifications should have allowed. Not only that, but the ship began to spin along its primary axis while maintaining its forward momentum, turning its exposed weak armor into a constantly shifting target that proved nearly impossible to hit with precision weapons. "What are they doing?" whispered another officer, her own scales cycling rapidly through colors of confusion and fear. The spinning maneuver served a second purpose that became clear moments later. As the ship rotated, it brought different weapon systems to bear in rapid succession, creating a constant barrage of fire from weapons that should have needed time to recharge between shots. The humans had apparently modified their ships to allow power routing between weapon systems, meaning they could maintain a higher rate of fire than their opponents had prepared for. But that wasn't the impossible part. The impossible part was what the human captain did next. As three hegemony cruisers closed in to surround the apparently doomed destroyer, the human ship suddenly jettisoned its rear armor plating. Not because of damage, not because of system failure, but deliberately. The armor plates, still carrying momentum, became improvised projectiles that scattered the hegemony formation. In the chaos that followed, the Murphy's Law used its now reduced mass to execute a maneuver that bent the laws of physics into uncomfortable shapes. Did they just use their own ship's armor as ammunition? Lieutenant Kethmore's voice cracked with disbelief. The recording continued to unfold like a fever dream written by someone who had never heard of proper military conduct. Human ships rammed enemy vessels and somehow survived the impact. They used their own escape pods as decoys, complete with heat signatures that confused enemy targeting systems. One human captain actually evacuated his bridge crew, set his ship on a collision course with a hegemony dreadnought, and then somehow managed to regain control at the last second to deliver a point-blank weapons barrage before using the enemy ship's own explosion to propel himself to safety. "Commander," said Chief Tactical Officer Rendala, her voice tight with professional confusion. "I'm reading that the humans have achieved a 73% casualty rate among enemy forces while suffering only 18% losses themselves. That's impossible. Show me their formation structure." The tactical display revealed something that made Vexhala's secondary heart skip beats. The humans weren't using formations at all. Each ship was operating independently, making tactical decisions in real time based on immediate circumstances rather than following an overall strategic plan. It was chaos, but chaos that somehow worked because it was completely unpredictable. "They're fighting like..." Rendala paused, searching for the right words. "Like they don't care if they live or die, but they're absolutely determined to take their enemies with them." The recording showed a human frigate called Spiked that had lost main power, weapons, and life support. Rather than surrender or attempt to escape, the crew had manually aligned their ship with an enemy destroyer and activated their self-destruct sequence. But even that wasn't straightforward. They had modified their reactor to create a directed explosion that not only destroyed their target, but sent debris into two other enemy ships, disabling them both. "Pause recording," Vexhala commanded. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. "Display casualty analyses for all recorded human engagements." The data that appeared made her scales shift to pale yellow, the color of her species equivalent to nausea. In every single engagement, humans took losses that would be considered catastrophic by any civilized standard, but their enemy losses were consistently higher, often dramatically so. They were winning through sheer refusal to lose. "Commander," Lieutenant Kethmore said quietly, "there's more. The humans have been broadcasting their battle recordings on open channels. They're not just fighting these battles, they're showing them to their entire population." "Why would they do that?" "According to our Cultural Analysis Division, they call it morale building. The more impossible the odds their military faces, the more determined their civilians become to support the war effort." Vexhala stared at the frozen image of a human ship that had lost everything except attitude and was still somehow firing weapons. She thought of her own people, how they calculated acceptable loss ratios and conducted wars with the clinical precision of surgeons. She thought of the hegemony's mathematical approaches to conflict, the Commonwealth's economic warfare models, and the Trade Federation's diplomatic solutions. None of them had prepared for an enemy that treated impossible odds as a personal challenge. Continue the recording. The final sequence showed something that would become legendary in human military history. A single human battleship, the Indomitable, found itself facing an entire hegemony battle group. 17 ships against one, with the human vessel already showing severe damage from previous encounters. The logical response would have been retreat. The tactically sound response would have been to call for reinforcements. The civilized response would have been to request terms for honorable surrender. The human response was to accelerate directly toward the center of the enemy formation while broadcasting a message on all frequencies. "Come on then, you bastards. Let's see what you're made of." What followed was 8 minutes of combat that redefined what military observers thought was possible. The Indomitable used everything: her weapons, her armor, her hull integrity, even her crew's escape pods, as tools of war. When her main guns were destroyed, she rammed enemy ships. When her armor was breached, she used the atmosphere loss as maneuvering thrust. When her engines failed, she used gravitational assists from debris to maintain mobility. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Indomitable was little more than a skeleton held together by human stubbornness and spite. But around her floated the remains of 11 enemy ships, with the survivors too damaged to continue fighting. The human captain's final transmission before losing communications was a simple, "Still here, you sons of bitches." End recording. Vexhala said softly. The bridge remained silent for long moments. Around her, the most decorated officers of the Zephyrian fleet struggled to process what they had witnessed. These weren't battles in any sense they understood. These were exhibitions of controlled insanity that somehow produced military victory. "Commander," Chief Tactical Officer Rendella said carefully, "what are your orders regarding human space?" Vexhala looked at her hands, noting how her scales had shifted to a color she didn't recognize. Fear, perhaps, but not fear of death or defeat. Fear of something much more fundamental. The fear that everything she had believed about warfare, about civilization, about the natural order of the galaxy, was wrong. "I need to see the individual crew recordings," she said finally. "Ma'am? The humans broadcast everything, yes? I want to see what their individual crew members were saying and doing during these battles." Lieutenant Kethmore's scales flickered with concern. "Commander, I'm not sure that's wise. The psychological profile suggests that human combat behavior may be disturbing to observe for species with our sensitivities. Show me." The recording that played next was from the bridge of the destroyer Murphy's Law during its impossible spinning attack run. The camera showed a command crew that by all rights should have been screaming in terror or paralyzed with fear. Instead, the human captain was grinning like she was enjoying the most entertaining game of her life. "Tommy, how's our structural integrity?" the captain asked as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. "Holding at 43%, Captain. Though I should mention that 43% is being generous." "Outstanding. Sarah, are we still spinning fast enough to make the Hegemon gunnery crews vomit?" "Affirmative, Captain. I'm reading significant targeting errors consistent with motion sickness in biological crew members." "Perfect. Jim, status on our armor plate projectile gambit?" "Direct hits on 2 targets, Captain. The third one dodged, but honestly, their evasive maneuver was so panicked it took them out of the fight anyway." The human crew was treating the battle like an elaborate puzzle to be solved, with death as merely one of several possible outcomes, rather than the terror-inducing inevitability it represented to other species. When their ship took a hit that would have sent any civilized crew into evacuation procedures, the humans simply adjusted their tactics and kept fighting. "Commander," came the voice of ship's counselor Mathala, "I'm reading dangerous stress indicators in your biosignatures. Perhaps we should postpone this review?" But Vexhala couldn't stop watching. She needed to understand how a species could function like this, how they could turn suicidal determination into tactical advantage. The recording switched to the engine room of the same ship, where human engineers were literally holding critical components together with their bare hands, while discussing modifications that would increase power output by 20%. "Is this modification safe?" one engineer asked. "Absolutely not," replied another, not pausing in her work. "But it'll be spectacular. Good enough for me." They were laughing, in the middle of a battle that should have killed them all, with enemy weapons tearing their ship apart around them. They were laughing and making jokes about their impending deaths, not because they didn't understand the danger, but because they had somehow made peace with it and decided to enjoy the experience anyway. The recording switched again, this time to the medical bay, where human doctors were treating wounded crew members while the ship spun and bucked under fire. The head doctor was simultaneously operating on a patient and shouting tactical suggestions to the bridge. "Captain, if you could time the next spin to coincide with my suture placement, I can finish this surgery and get back to damage control."
"You got it, Doc. Spinning in 3,
2, mark. They had turned their entire ship into a weapon, but more than that, they had turned themselves into weapons. Every human on board was simultaneously performing their assigned duties and contributing to the overall battle plan in ways that their job descriptions never contemplated. "Show me the recording from the Indomitable," Vexhala said, her voice barely above a whisper. This recording was different. The crew knew they were going to die. The mathematics of their situation made survival statistically impossible, and unlike other species, humans were disturbingly good at calculating odds in real time. But knowing they were doomed didn't make them surrender or lose hope. Instead, it freed them to fight with a creativity that bordered on the supernatural. 17 ships, the captain said calmly, studying his tactical display. "Well, that's inconvenient." "Orders, sir?" asked his first officer. "We're going to make this cost them more than they're willing to pay. Sir, with respect, we don't have enough firepower to..." Concentrating particularly, Son, we don't have enough firepower to win a conventional engagement. Fortunately, I've never been particularly conventional. What followed was a masterclass in human warfare philosophy. Instead of trying to fight 17 ships simultaneously, the captain used his ship's mobility and the enemy's expectations against them. He flew directly into the center of their formation, forcing them to either fire on each other or hold their shots to avoid friendly fire incidents. Ramming speed, the captain ordered. Sir, if we ram at this velocity, it'll destroy us too. Only if we actually make contact, number one. Trust me. The Indomitable accelerated toward the largest enemy ship at maximum velocity, forcing the entire enemy formation to adjust their positions to avoid the collision. At the last second, the human ship used its maneuvering thrusters to slide sideways along the enemy hull, raking it with point-blank weapons fire while using the larger ship as a shield against the rest of the formation. But even that wasn't the remarkable part. The remarkable part was listening to the crew's communications during the maneuver. They weren't just following orders or acting on training. They were actively contributing ideas, making suggestions, and adapting the plan in real time based on immediate observations. Captain, if we vent atmosphere through the port side damage, we can use it for additional maneuvering thrust, suggested an engineer. Do it. Sir, I'm reading structural weaknesses in the enemy ship's weapons array. If we can time our next pass with their recharge cycle, we can take out their primary batteries, called out a tactical officer. Excellent. Make it happen. Captain, came a voice from the medical bay. We've got wounded who can't fight, but they can still operate systems remotely. Should I set them up with targeting control for our point defense grid? Outstanding initiative, Doctor. They weren't just fighting as individuals who happened to be on the same ship. They were fighting as a single organism with dozens of brains all focused on the same goal. When one system failed, another crew member immediately took over its function. When tactical situations changed, the entire crew adapted their behavior without waiting for orders. End recording, Vexhala said. She stood in silence for several minutes, processing what she had witnessed. Around her, the bridge crew waited for orders, but she found herself unable to speak. Everything she had believed about military science, about the nature of warfare itself, lay in ruins around her. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 worlds using superior technology, better training, and mathematical precision. They calculated acceptable losses, planned for contingencies, and executed operations with mechanical efficiency. It had worked perfectly against every enemy they had ever faced, but none of their enemies had been human. Commander? Lieutenant Kethmore ventured carefully. Prepare my resignation, Vexhala said quietly. Ma'am?
You heard me.
Draft a formal resignation from active duty, effective immediately. Commander, surely there's no need for such drastic action. These recordings are disturbing, yes, but... Lieutenant, I have spent my entire adult life studying warfare. I have commanded fleets that brought entire worlds to heel. I thought I understood what it meant to fight, to win, to die with honor. She turned to face her crew, and they could see that her scales had shifted to colors they had never seen before. I was wrong about everything. Chief Tactical Officer Rendala stepped forward. Commander, what do you intend to do? I'm going to Earth, Vexhala said simply. I need to understand how they do this. How they turn impossible odds into victory. How they make death into a weapon. How they fight wars that we don't even have words for. That's extremely dangerous. Earth is in the middle of a war zone, and the humans might not. The humans, Vexhala interrupted. Just fought a battle where they were outnumbered 17-1 and somehow came out ahead. I think I'm safer with them than against them. She walked to her command station and began entering her resignation codes into the system. 43 years of service ending with a few keystrokes because she had seen something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the universe. Ma'am, the Council will never approve this, Lieutenant Kethmore said desperately. You're one of our most decorated commanders. You can't just... Watch me, Vexhala said, submitting the resignation. And, Lieutenant, when they ask you what happened here, tell them the truth. Tell them that we've been fighting children's games while the humans have been fighting wars. The civilian transport Wanderer's Hope was nothing like the military vessels Vexhala had spent her life aboard. Where Zephyrian ships hummed with purposeful efficiency, this converted cargo hauler wheezed and rattled through hyperspace like an elderly creature trying to remember how its joints were supposed to work. The passenger compartment smelled of a dozen different species' bodily functions. and the recycled air carried the distinct tang of overworked life support systems. Vexhala didn't mind. After submitting her resignation and booking passage to Earth, she had spent 3 days in her quarters reading every piece of human military history the galactic databases contained. What she found had shaken her understanding of warfare even more thoroughly than those battle recordings. "Excuse me, are you the Zephyrian commander who resigned to study human tactics?" Vexhala looked up from her portable display to see an Altarian trader, his 6 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of extreme curiosity among his people. Word traveled fast in the civilian shipping lanes, apparently. "Former commander," she corrected. "And yes." "Fascinating. May I ask what convinced you to take such a drastic step?" Vexhala gestured to the seat across from her. The Altarian settled his bulky form into the chair, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking against the metal frame. "Tell me," she said, "what do you know about human military history?" "Only what everyone knows. They're primitives who compensate for poor technology with reckless aggression. Typical for young species, really." "That's what I thought too," Vexhala said, turning her display so he could see it. "Until I started reading their historical records. Do you know what the Battle of Thermopylae was?" "Never heard of it." 300 human warriors held off an army of several 100,000 for 3 days. Not with superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but with tactical positioning and absolute refusal to retreat. The Altarian's eyes blinked out of sequence, indicating skepticism. "That's clearly an exaggeration. No force that small could—" "The battle is historically documented from multiple sources, including enemy accounts. But that's not even the remarkable part." Vexhala scrolled through the data. "The remarkable part is that this wasn't unusual for them. Human military history is filled with similar engagements where vastly outnumbered forces achieved impossible victories through sheer determination and tactical creativity." She brought up another file. "The Battle of Rorke's Drift. 150 humans defended a small outpost against 4,000 enemies for 2 days. The Siege of the Alamo. Less than 200 defenders against several thousand attackers. The Battle of Saragossa, where human civilians, not even soldiers, held off a professional army for months." "These can't all be accurate," the Altarian protested. "The mathematics alone." "That's exactly the point," Vexhala interrupted. "We think in terms of mathematics. Humans think in terms of what needs to be done regardless of the mathematics." She opened another file. This one containing audio recordings from human military communications during recent battles. "Listen to this. It's from a human destroyer captain whose ship was disabled and surrounded by enemy forces." The recording crackled with static and the sounds of explosions, but the human voice came through clearly. "Well, boys, looks like we're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck. Anybody got any bright ideas for how to make this interesting?" "He's joking," the Altarian said in disbelief. "He's about to die and he's making jokes. Keep listening." The recording continued with the crew members suggesting increasingly desperate and dangerous tactics, each suggestion met with enthusiasm rather than concern. By the end of the engagement, they had turned their disabled ship into a makeshift weapons platform and held off enemy forces until reinforcements arrived. "They treat warfare like a collaborative art project," Vexhala said, closing the file. "Every crew member contributes ideas, every situation becomes an opportunity to try something new. They don't just follow doctrine, they invent it on the spot." The Altarian was quiet for several minutes, his eyes cycling through different patterns as he processed what he had heard. "Where are you traveling to study this phenomenon?" "Earth. I want to observe their military training, speak with their commanders, understand how they think about warfare. Earth is in the middle of a war zone. Human space is under constant attack from 3 different directions." "I know," Vexhala said simply. "That's exactly why I need to go there now." The transport shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace for a routine fuel stop at Kepler Station, a neutral trading post that served as a crossroads for several major shipping lanes. Through the viewports, Vexhala could see the massive ring structure spinning slowly against the backdrop of a red giant star. "Attention passengers," announced the ship's captain over the intercom, "will be docked for approximately 6 hours while we take on fuel and supplies. Feel free to visit the station, but please be back aboard by the 15th hour, or you'll be finding alternate transportation." Vexhala decided to stretch her legs and continue her research in the station's information center. Kepler Station was known for having one of the most comprehensive databases in neutral space, with access to news feeds and military updates from across the galaxy. The station's main promenade was a riot of colors, sounds, and smells from dozens of different species. Merchants hawked their wares in a babel of languages, while travelers from every corner of known space hurried about their business. Near the information center, Vexhala noticed a crowd gathered around a large display screen. "What's happening?" she asked a nearby Centauran clerk. "Live feed from the Vega system," the clerk replied, his tentacles writhing with excitement. "The humans are attempting to break the hegemony blockade. Everyone's watching to see if they'll actually try it or come to their senses." Vexhala pushed through the crowd to get a better view of the screen. The tactical display showed a standard hegemony blockade formation, 12 heavy cruisers positioned in a perfect sphere around the jump point, with destroyer screens providing overlapping coverage. It was a textbook example of how to prevent enemy ships from entering a system. "Human fleet detected," announced the news commentator. "Preliminary scans indicate, wait, this can't be right. I'm showing only 4 ships approaching the blockade." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even the most optimistic military analyst wouldn't give 4 ships any chance against a full blockade formation. It would be suicide. "Perhaps they're carrying some new superweapon," suggested someone in the crowd. "Or maybe they're here to negotiate," offered another voice. Vexhala watched the human ships approach, studying their formation and behavior. What she saw made her scales shift to deep blue again. The humans weren't approaching like a force preparing for battle or negotiation. They were approaching like predators who had spotted their prey. "Human vessels are maintaining course and speed directly toward the blockade center," the commentator continued. "No communications have been received from either side." The 4 human ships suddenly separated, each taking a different vector toward the blockade formation. But they weren't trying to find weak points or gaps in the coverage. Instead, each ship was heading directly for the strongest defended positions. "They're not trying to break through," Vexhala whispered. "They're trying to break it completely." The first human ship, a heavy cruiser designated Persistence, engaged 3 hegemony vessels simultaneously. But instead of trying to maintain distance and trade weapons fire, the Persistence accelerated directly into the enemy formation. At the last possible moment, it released a spread of escape pods that immediately began broadcasting false sensor signatures. "What are those pods doing?" asked the Centauran clerk. Vexhala was beginning to understand. "They're not pods. They're decoys designed to look like pods. The humans are using their own survival equipment as a weapons system. The hegemony ships, conditioned by millions of years of civilized warfare to avoid firing on escape pods, hesitated for crucial seconds. In that hesitation, the Persistence slipped between them and began firing at point-blank range, while using the enemy ships themselves as cover against return fire. The second human ship, the destroyer Vindication, did something even more impossible. It deliberately flew into the intersection of 3 different targeting solutions, a position that should have resulted in its immediate destruction from crossfire. Instead, the ship's captain somehow timed the maneuver so that the 3 hegemony ships fired simultaneously, with their shots arriving at the exact moment the Vindication wasn't there anymore. "Did they just trick 3 enemy ships into shooting each other?" someone in the crowd asked incredulously. The 3rd and 4th human ships were working together in a pattern that made no tactical sense until you realized they weren't fighting 12 separate enemies. They were fighting one large, predictable organism that followed established protocols. Every time the hegemony formation tried to adjust to counter one human ship's actions, the others exploited the gaps created by the adjustment. "The blockade is collapsing," announced the commentator, disbelief clear in his voice. 4 human ships have somehow disrupted a formation that should have been able to defeat a fleet 10 times their size. But the humans weren't done. As the hegemony ships fell back to regroup, the human vessels didn't pursue or attempt to exploit their advantage. Instead, they held position and began broadcasting something on all frequencies. "What are they transmitting?" Vexhala asked. A nearby crystalline entity extended one of its appendages toward a portable translator. It's music. They're playing music on military frequencies." The crowd fell silent as the translation came through the speakers. "We are the champions, my friends, and we'll keep on fighting till the end." "They're celebrating," the Centauran whispered. "In the middle of a battle zone, they're celebrating." But Vexhala was beginning to understand that it wasn't celebration in any sense she recognized. It was something more fundamental, more primal. The humans weren't just fighting wars, they were enjoying them. Not in a sadistic way, but in the way that master craftsmen enjoyed practicing their art. The hegemony forces regrouped and attempted a second attack, this time with revised tactics designed to counter the humans' unconventional approach. It didn't help. The humans simply adapted to the new tactics and found different ways to turn the enemy's strengths against them. "Hegemony forces are withdrawing from the system," the commentator announced. The blockade has been completely broken with minimal human casualties. The crowd began to disperse, but Vexhala remained in front of the screen, studying the aftermath displays. The humans hadn't just won. They had won so decisively that their enemies had fled rather than risk further engagement. 4 ships against 12, victory achieved through nothing but tactical innovation and absolute fearlessness. "Excuse me," said a voice behind her. Vexhala turned to see a human female wearing the uniform of a civilian merchant captain. "I couldn't help but notice you've been watching our boys work."
Your boys? The Persistence is commanded by my brother, the human said with obvious pride.
"Captain Jennifer Harrison, best damn tactical officer the fleet's ever produced." Vexhala studied the human carefully. She was small by galactic standards, with the typical fragile build of her species, but there was something in her eyes, an intensity that made Vexhala's secondary heart skip beats. "How does she do it?" Vexhala asked. "How do humans fight like that?" The human woman smiled, and Vexhala realized it wasn't entirely a pleasant expression. "We've been fighting for survival since we climbed down from the trees. Every other species in the galaxy evolved on worlds where cooperation and civilized behavior were evolutionary advantages. We evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill us every single day. That doesn't explain the tactical innovations, the ability to adapt in real time." "Sure it does. When your options are adapted or die, you get really good at adapting really fast. When your planet is full of predators that can kill you in hundreds of different ways, you learn to think like a predator yourself. When survival depends on your ability to use anything and everything as a weapon, you stop thinking of objects as having single purposes." The human gestured toward the screen where the tactical aftermath was still playing. "Every human child grows up learning that fair fights are for sports, not survival. That following the rules only works if everyone else follows them too. That sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules entirely. That the cooperation, the way your crews work together, pack hunting." The human said simply, "Humans are social predators, Commander. We evolved to hunt in groups where every individual contributes to the kill. In your military, soldiers follow orders. In ours, every crew member is expected to think, adapt, and contribute ideas in real time." Vexhala felt a chill run through her circulatory system. "You're not just fighting wars, you're hunting." "Now you're getting it," the human said with that unsettling smile. "And right now, the galaxy is full of prey." "I need to get to Earth," Vexhala said urgently. "I need to understand how this works from the inside." "Good luck with that," the human replied. "Earth's not exactly rolling out welcome mats for alien military observers these days. We're kind of busy with 3 different invasions. 3 invasions simultaneously, the hegemony from the core systems, the Trade Federation from the Rim, and some newcomers calling themselves the Purification Alliance from the far spiral arm. They all decided to carve up human space at the same time." The human smile became even more predatory. "Poor bastards have no idea what they've walked into." Vexhala returned to her transport with her mind racing. She had thought she was going to Earth to study human military tactics, but she was beginning to realize that human tactics weren't something separate from human nature, they were an expression of it. Humans didn't fight wars the way other species did because they weren't other species. They were something unique, something the galaxy had never seen before. As the transport prepared to jump back into hyperspace, Vexhala pulled up her personal files and began composing a message to her former second-in-command. Lieutenant Kethmore needed to know what was coming, needed to understand that the galaxy was about to change in ways that no amount of mathematical modeling could predict. "Kethmore," she began recording, "by the time you receive this message, I will be approaching human space. I want you to understand that everything we thought we knew about warfare is wrong. The humans aren't just another species with different tactics. They're an entirely different approach to existence itself." She paused, trying to find words for concepts that didn't exist in her language. "They don't fight wars, Kethmore. They hunt. And they've been hunting things much more dangerous than us for their entire evolutionary history. Pass this information up the chain of command. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when you threaten a species that considers impossible odds to be a personal invitation to prove you wrong." The transport jumped into hyperspace, carrying Vexhala toward a world that was about to teach the galaxy a new definition of warfare. Behind her, news of the Vega system engagement was spreading through the galactic information networks, and military analysts across known space were beginning to ask very uncomfortable questions about what humanity's presence in the galaxy actually meant. In the depths of space, Three massive invasion fleets continued their approach toward Earth, confident in their superior numbers, advanced technology, and proven tactical doctrines. None of them had yet realized that they weren't invading a world. They were walking into the territory of apex predators who had spent millions of years perfecting the art of making bigger, stronger, more numerous enemies into evolutionary mistakes. The first thing that struck Vexhala about the Sol system was how wrong the intelligence reports had been. According to every galactic database, Earth should have been a moderately defended world, with standard orbital platforms and a small defensive fleet. Instead, she found herself looking at something that resembled the aftermath of an explosion in a shipyard. Hundreds of vessels filled the space around Earth, but calling them ships required considerable generosity. Vexhala watched through the transport's viewports as what appeared to be a converted mining barge welded together with a passenger liner, engaged in formation, flying with something that looked like it had been built from spare parts and optimism. Weapons were bolted onto surfaces that had never been designed to support them. Armor plating was clearly improvised, and half the vessels seemed to be leaking atmosphere in controlled streams. Unidentified transport, this is Earth Defense Control, came a transmission. State your business or prepare to be boarded. The transport's captain, a nervous Regelian trader, activated his communications array. This is civilian transport Wanderer's Hope, requesting permission to dock. We have a passenger seeking passage to Earth's surface. Negative, Wanderer's Hope. Earth is under military lockdown. No civilians permitted planetside without authorization from Fleet Command. Vexhala moved to the communications station. Earth Defense Control. This is former Zephyrian Commander Vexhala requesting audience with your military leadership. I am seeking to understand human tactical doctrines. The line was silent for several long seconds. Then, say again please, did you say you're a Zephyrian commander who wants to study our tactics? Former commander, I resigned my position to make this journey. Another pause. Stand by. Wanderer's Hope. You're being transferred to Admiral Chen's staff. The transport shuddered slightly as several human patrol craft took up escort positions around it. Vexhala could see the crews through their viewports, and what she observed made her scales shift to deep blue again. The humans weren't maintaining rigid military bearing or following standard escort protocols. Instead, they were clearly discussing something among themselves while gesturing toward her transport, and she could swear one of them was actually grinning. Former Commander Vexhala came a new voice, crisp and professional. This is Captain Morrison, Admiral Chen's aide-de-camp. The Admiral is very interested in speaking with you, but I should warn you that we're currently engaged in active combat operations against 3 separate invasion forces. I understand, Captain. I actually hope to observe those operations. Observer status is unusual during wartime. May I ask what prompted a senior Zephyrian commander to resign her position to study our methods? Vexhala looked out at the chaotic collection of vessels that somehow managed to maintain formation while performing maneuvers that violated several basic principles of physics. Captain, I watched recordings of your fleet actions. I need to understand how you achieve tactical victories that should be mathematically impossible. Ah, Captain Morrison said, and Vexhala could hear the smile in his voice. You're here because we broke your brain. Understood. The Admiral will definitely want to meet you. Fair warning, though, he's currently coordinating a 3-front defensive action, while simultaneously planning a counter-offensive that most sane military minds would consider suicide. You might find the experience educational. The escort guided the transport to a massive orbital station that appeared to have been constructed by welding together several different types of structures. Cargo modules were connected to military command centers, which were attached to what looked like modified civilian habitats. The entire complex bristled with weapons systems that seemed to have been installed wherever there was available space. What is this place? The transport captain asked nervously. Fort Defiance, Captain Morrison replied. Our primary command and control center. Also our main shipyard, logistics hub, civilian refugee center, and recreational facility. We built it last month. Last month? Vexhala said in disbelief. You constructed a station this size in 1 month? Emergency construction protocols. When you're facing 3 simultaneous invasions, you learn to build fast or die slow. Admiral Chen will brief you on the details. The docking process was unlike anything Vexhala had ever experienced. Instead of the careful, methodical approach used at civilized stations, the human dock crew simply grabbed the transport with mechanical arms and pulled it into position, while simultaneously extending boarding tubes and beginning refueling operations. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. Captain Morrison met her at the airlock, and Vexhala was immediately struck by how young he looked. By Zephyrian standards, he would barely qualify as an adult, yet he carried himself with the confidence of a seasoned military professional. "Commander Vexhala," he said, extending his hand in a human greeting gesture. "Welcome to Fort Defiance. I apologize for the controlled chaos, but we're in the middle of coordinating responses to 3 different crisis situations simultaneously." As they walked through the station's corridors, Vexhala observed human crew members performing multiple tasks while maintaining what appeared to be casual conversations with their colleagues. An engineering technician was simultaneously repairing a power coupling, monitoring a tactical display, and explaining a joke to his assistant. 2 medical officers were treating a patient while discussing modifications to their ship's defensive systems. "Captain Morrison, do your personnel always multitask to this degree?" "Only when we're at war," he replied, which admittedly is most of the time. Admiral Chen likes to say that humans work best under pressure, so we try to maintain optimal pressure levels. They entered the command center, and Vexhala found herself in the middle of what could only be described as organized chaos. Dozens of human officers were simultaneously tracking multiple tactical situations, coordinating resource allocation, and apparently having 3 different conversations at once. Large displays showed the positions of various fleets around Earth, with color-coded indicators for friendly forces, enemy formations, and something labeled Creative Solutions in Progress. "Admiral Chen," Captain Morrison announced, "Commander Vexhala has arrived." Admiral Chen turned from a tactical display where he had been studying what appeared to be a completely hopeless strategic situation. He was older than most of the crew Vexhala had seen, with grey hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent making impossible decisions. But like every human she had encountered, his eyes held that intensity that made her secondary heart skip beats. "Commander," he said, extending his hand. "I understand you're here to learn how we fight. Excellent timing. We're about to demonstrate several advanced techniques that your military academies probably don't cover. Admiral, what exactly is your current situation?" Chen gestured toward the main tactical display. "The Hegemony fleet is approaching from Corward, approximately 18 hours out. 47 ships, including 6 dreadnoughts. Standard battle line formation. Very professional. The Trade Federation is coming from Rimwood, 31 ships focused on economic warfare. They want to capture our infrastructure intact rather than destroy it. And the Purification Alliance is approaching from the Spiral Arm with 62 ships and some very interesting ideas about human genetic inferiority." Vexhala studied the display, calculating numbers and positions. "Admiral, you're outnumbered approximately 7-1 by total ship count, and that's before considering the technological advantages your enemies possess." 7-1, Admiral Chen mused. "Honestly, I was expecting worse odds. Commander, let me show you something that might explain why we're not particularly concerned." He led her to another display showing detailed fleet compositions. "The Hegemony believes in overwhelming firepower and mathematical precision. They'll approach in perfect formation, calculate optimal firing solutions, and execute a methodical destruction of our defensive positions. Very predictable. Section 1. Do wrong, trust a few, 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 do wrong, trust a few. It would be if we planned to stand still and trade shots with them. But we don't fight other people's wars, Commander. We fight our wars." Chen turned to address the command center. "Colonel Martinez, status on Operation Pandemonium." "Ready to execute on your command, Admiral," replied a Hispanic woman whose uniform bore the insignia of the Marine Corps. "All units are in position and commanders have been briefed on their creative parameters." "Creative parameters?" Vexhala asked. "We don't just give our people objectives, Commander. We give them objectives and permission to achieve them by any means they deem appropriate. Military creativity, we call it." Chen smiled that predatory human smile. "Would you like to observe our response to the incoming fleets?" "I would be honored, Admiral. Fair warning, this might challenge some of your assumptions about proper military conduct." The first phase of Operation Pandemonium began 3 hours later, when the Hegemony fleet was still 14 hours out from Earth. Vexhala watched in confusion as human ships began leaving their defensive positions and heading directly toward all 3 enemy fleets simultaneously. "Admiral, your forces are splitting up. Military doctrine suggests concentration of force against." Commander, Chen interrupted gently. Human military doctrine suggests that military doctrine is a guideline for people who can't think for themselves. Watch. The human ships approaching the hegemony fleet weren't flying in formation or following any tactical pattern Vexhala recognized. Instead, they seemed to be meandering through space like tourists on a sightseeing expedition. But as they approached the enemy fleet, each ship began transmitting something. What are they broadcasting? Vexhala asked. Cultural exchange programs, Colonel Martinez replied with a grin. Music, literature, historical documentaries, comedy shows. We're sharing human civilization with our guests. I don't understand. Watch the hegemony response, Admiral Chen said. On the tactical display, Vexhala could see the hegemony fleet's reaction to the transmissions. Ships began breaking formation as crews became distracted by the cultural broadcasts. Some vessels actually slowed down to listen to human music. Others began requesting specific programs. They're talking to your ships instead of shooting at them. Humans are very social creatures, Commander. Most species find us fascinating once they get to know us. The hegemony crews have been in space for months with nothing to do except follow orders and maintain equipment. Suddenly they're exposed to human entertainment, and they discover that we're much more interesting than their commanding officers thought. The Trade Federation fleet was experiencing a different problem. Human ships were broadcasting economic data showing the profitability of trade relationships versus the cost of military occupation. But they weren't just sending dry statistics. They were including testimonials from other species who had found human trade partnerships to be extremely lucrative. You're turning an invasion into a business negotiation, Vexhala observed. The Trade Federation thinks in terms of cost-benefit analysis, Admiral Chen explained. We're simply providing them with better data for their calculations. It turns out that humans make much better trading partners than subjects. But it was the approach to the Purification Alliance that truly demonstrated human tactical thinking. Instead of broadcasting cultural programs or economic data, the human ships approaching this fleet were transmitting genetic analysis data showing the diversity and adaptability of human DNA. What are you trying to accomplish with the Purification Alliance? They believe humans are genetically inferior, Colonel Martinez said. We're showing them that human genetic diversity is actually one of our greatest strengths. Every human carries genetic markers from multiple evolutionary branches, making us incredibly adaptable to different environments. How does that help tactically? Watch, Admiral Chen said. The human ships suddenly began demonstrating that adaptability in real time. Ships modified their configurations to match environmental conditions around them. Crew members adjusted their behavior patterns to optimize performance for specific tasks. Within hours, the human fleet had essentially evolved to counter every tactical advantage the Purification Alliance had planned to exploit. You're not just fighting them, Vexhala whispered. You're proving them wrong in real time. The Purification Alliance believes in genetic purity and species superiority, Admiral Chen explained. We're demonstrating that diversity and adaptability are superior to purity and rigidity. Their entire worldview is the foundation of their military doctrine. If we can shatter their worldview, their military effectiveness collapses. 6 hours later, the impossible had become routine. The hegemony fleet had stopped its approach entirely and was requesting permission to dock for cultural exchange programs. The Trade Federation was negotiating trade agreements instead of planning attacks, and the Purification Alliance was broadcasting requests for genetic diversity data to improve their own species' adaptability. How? Vexhala asked. How did you turn 3 invasion fleets into diplomatic missions without firing a shot? We fought wars they couldn't win, Admiral Chen said simply.
The hegemony expected a military engagement, so we fought a cultural war.
The Trade Federation expected economic conquest, so we fought an economic demonstration. The Purification Alliance expected to prove genetic superiority, so we fought a genetic education campaign. But what if they had adapted? What if they had ignored your transmissions and pressed their attacks? Colonel Martinez smiled. Then we would have moved to Phase 2 of Operation Pandemonium, which is demonstrating why humans call impossible tactical situations Tuesday, Admiral Chen said. Commander, would you like to see our contingency plans? The tactical display shifted to show detailed scenarios for conventional military engagement. Vexhala studied the plans and felt her scales shift to colors she didn't recognize. The humans had prepared for every possible enemy response, but their solutions violated every principle of civilized warfare she had ever learned. You are planning to use civilian transports as weapons platforms? Converted civilian transports, Chen corrected. We've learned that enemy fleets don't expect cargo haulers to mount military-grade weapons systems or execute suicide attacks. The element of surprise can be very effective, and what is Operation Hailstorm? Deployment of our asteroid defense grid as offensive weapons, Colonel Martinez explained. We surround enemy fleets with automated mining platforms that simultaneously harvest raw materials and construct new weapon systems in real time. Vexhala scrolled through more plans, each one more impossible than the last. Operation Last Stand, you were prepared to evacuate Earth's population while turning the planet itself into a weapon. Scorched Earth tactics, but on a planetary scale, Admiral Chen confirmed. If all else failed, we would have made Earth too dangerous to occupy while establishing new colonies elsewhere. Humans are very good at starting over. Admiral, Vexhala said carefully, these aren't just military tactics. This is a complete redefinition of what warfare means. Now you're beginning to understand, Chen said. Humans don't fight wars the way other species do because we can't afford to. We're not the strongest species, or the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. But we are the most adaptable, the most creative, and the most stubborn. When you can't win by being better, you win by being different. But how do you train for this? How do you teach tactical creativity? Colonel Martinez laughed. Commander, we don't train humans to be creative, we train them to think. Then we get out of their way and let them solve problems. Every human child grows up playing games where they have to invent new rules, tell stories where they create new worlds, and solve puzzles that have multiple correct answers. More importantly, Admiral Chen added, every human grows up learning that authority figures aren't automatically correct, that established rules can be changed, and that individual initiative is valued over strict obedience. Our military personnel aren't just following orders, they're actively participating in the creation of tactics and strategies. Vexhala spent the next several days observing human military operations, and what she found challenged every assumption she had ever made about organized warfare. Human crew members regularly suggested modifications to mission plans. Officers encouraged their subordinates to question orders and propose alternatives. Most remarkably, successful tactical innovations were immediately shared across the entire fleet, meaning that humans got more effective as conflicts continued, rather than being worn down by prolonged engagement. Commander, Admiral Chen said on her final day at Fort Defiance, what will you tell your people when you return? I'm not sure they would believe me, Vexhala replied honestly. How do you explain to a civilized species that warfare can be an art form rather than just applied mathematics? Maybe that's the wrong question, Colonel Martinez suggested. Maybe the question is, what happens when the galaxy realizes that humans don't just fight wars, we transform them into something entirely different? Vexhala considered this as she prepared to return to Zephyrian space. She had come to Earth expecting to learn about human tactics and strategies. Instead, she had discovered that humans represented something completely new in galactic civilization, a species that viewed impossible challenges as opportunities for creative expression. As her transport departed Sol system, she began composing her final report to the Zephyrian Council. It would be a difficult report to write because she would have to explain that humanity wasn't just another species with different military doctrines. They were an evolutionary development that made most existing approaches to conflict obsolete. Honored counselors, she began, I write to inform you that our understanding of warfare must be fundamentally revised. Humanity has introduced concepts to galactic civilization that render our existing military doctrines insufficient. They do not fight wars as we understand them. Instead, they transform conflict itself into something entirely new, something that turns their opponent's strengths into weaknesses and their own weaknesses into unexpected advantages. She paused, looking back at the Sol system where 3 invasion fleets were now participating in cultural exchange programs and trade negotiations. We have spent millennia perfecting the art of organized violence. Humans have perfected the art of turning organized violence into something else entirely. I recommend immediate diplomatic contact to establish formal alliance protocols, because I believe humanity represents the future of conflict resolution in our galaxy.
And if the Council chooses to ignore this recommendation?
She added quietly to herself, then I believe the future of our galaxy will be determined by whether we learn to think like humans, or whether humans decide we're worth keeping around. The transport jumped into hyperspace, carrying news that would reshape galactic civilization's understanding of warfare, diplomacy, and the very nature of intelligent conflict. Behind her, Earth continued its transformation of 3 invasion forces into 3 sets of new allies, proving once again that humans didn't just fight wars, they evolved them into something the galaxy had never seen before. In the depths of space, other species' military planners were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about their own doctrines and strategies. The human model of adaptive, creative, collaborative warfare was spreading through galactic civilization like a virus, infecting traditional military thinking with dangerous new ideas about what might be possible if soldiers were allowed to think for themselves. The galaxy would never be quite the same.